Hello, I'm Lucy Gray. You're watching The Context on BBC News.
IDF carried out a targeted strike in Beirut, eliminating the head of Hezbollah terror organization's operations division, Ibrahim Akil.
You can imagine that you start a day with having another country's fighter jets over your head. Smoke could be seen from different parts of Beirut. The sound of the explosion could be heard.
The Israeli military saying that this was a targeted operation, and now there is obviously a lot of tension here.
The Lebanese government does not want a full-out, an all-out war on our southern borders. But clearly Lebanon will not shy away if it's attacked. We reserve the right for self-defense.
Well, joining me tonight is journalist and broadcaster Michael Crick and the political and legal strategist Kelly Hyman. First, let's get the latest headlines. The UN Security Council has been meeting to discuss the crisis in the Middle East after 4 days of intensive Israeli attacks on Hezbollah. The UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk said he was appalled by the indiscriminate targeting of thousands of people in Lebanon through the explosion of communication devices, saying it violated international law. It's emerged that the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner and the Chancellor Rachel Reeves will not accept any further donations for clothing, according to a Downing Street source. The Prime Minister has been embroiled in a row after it emerged that he'd repeatedly accepted gifts including sunglasses, tailoring and personal shopping for him and his wife. Lawyers representing some of the 37 women who've accused Mohammed Al Fayed of rape and sexual assault say the former Harrods owner was a monster whose behaviour was enabled by the department store. It comes after a BBC investigation heard testimony from more than 20 women who said they were sexually assaulted by the billionaire who died last year. The current owners of Harrods say that they're appalled by the allegations and have a settlement process in place for alleged victims. And early voting has begun in 3 US states for November's presidential election. Voters in Virginia, Minnesota and South Dakota are casting their ballots in polling stations across the states. Dozens more states will follow next month. It comes as Georgia announced all votes there would be counted by hand instead of machine, following doubts among some Republicans about the authenticity of the result there in 2020. Let's turn our attention now to Lebanon. The Israeli military says it's killed a number of top Hezbollah commanders in an airstrike. The strike hit a high-rise block of flats in the capital, Beirut. The Lebanese Health Ministry says 66 people were injured and 14 were killed. Israel says it killed around 10 Hezbollah commanders. The most senior among them was Ibrahim Akil. The United States had labelled him a global terrorist, putting a multi-million-dollar bounty on his head because of his links to the bombing of US Marines in Lebanon in 1983. The strike continues what's been a tense period in the region with intensifying cross-border clashes between Israel and Hezbollah. The Israeli military said more than 100 rockets had been fired into northern Israel, and Hezbollah said it had hit an Israeli intelligence base that it blames for what it called assassinations. Our Middle East correspondent Hugo Bichega is following developments from Beirut.
This latest Israeli airstrike, which the Israeli military says killed a senior Hezbollah commander, Ibrahim Akil, is another humiliation for the group. It happened here in Beirut, in the Hezbollah stronghold of Dahir, just days after hundreds of pagers and walkie-talkies used by the group exploded across Lebanon, causing panic in a country already exhausted by this conflict. Now, this escalation comes as Israeli officials have vowed to degrade Hezbollah after almost a year of hostilities along the border. Now, this is a group that is under a lot of pressure. Hezbollah wants to be seen as a significant, powerful enemy by Israel, but it has now suffered a number of significant setbacks in recent days. So how is it going to respond? Hezbollah doesn't have many options to give a significant response without sparking a major war with Israel. It has given indications it doesn't want one, and its supporters in Iran don't see the reason for a bigger confrontation either.
Hugo Bachega there. Let's speak now to former US Ambassador to Lebanon, David Hale. Thank you, David, very much for joining us. As Hugo was saying there, this latest attack is another humiliation in what's been, a humiliating week for Hezbollah. What do you make in terms of the impact that these attacks will have had on Hezbollah? How weakened are they by it?
Well, I think it's a devastating blow to their reputation, and it raises a lot of questions, I think, among Lebanese as to why it is that their country is in the crosshairs of Israel because of Hezbollah's decision on October 8 to launch a war related to Gaza, which has no real direct connection to Lebanon. But I also agree with what was just said, that Hezbollah and Iran, their backers, really don't want a full-blown war. They want to keep pressure on Israel and, frankly, return to the pre-October 7 status quo where they had their hand on the spigot of violence. That is something that the Israelis are very unlikely to accept. So that is the scenario we're seeing unfolding.
They may not want a major escalation, but they have talked about retaliation and they will respond to this, won't they? I mean, we've already seen the exchange of fire over the border. What do you expect them to do?
I don't think the exchanges I've seen in the last 24 hours are really all that different than the tit-for-tat back and forth that we're all very familiar with. And frankly, Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, gave a speech on earlier today in which, frankly, or maybe it was yesterday, I didn't hear him say things that suggested there was an imminent plan. What I heard him say was that they will respond at a time and place of their choosing, which in my experience in the Middle East is often code for, frankly, there won't be a direct response, just as there wasn't a response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, just as there wasn't a response to the assassination of Shukr, just as there wasn't a response to the 2008 assassination of Imad Mughniya, despite Nasrallah saying exactly what he has said this week.
Israel has said, when it comes to Hamas, that they want total surrender. That's what they've said is their aim in terms of when they're fighting Hamas. In terms of this with Hezbollah, what can be the ultimate aim here from Israel?
Well, the mindset in Israel today, as I understand it, is after October 7 and never again, that they're not going to return to the status quo before October 7, that there's an expectation that a new national security doctrine will emerge. I think we're seeing that already with a much more aggressive and preemptive technology and espionage-based strategy. They can't defeat Hezbollah. This is unfortunately beyond their means. What they're looking for is a strategy where deterrence is restored. And they tend to view that as something that is only going to come from a military operation. Lebanon is not a state that is in control of its own territory or a sovereign nation, unfortunately. And unless the Americans can provide a diplomatic approach that changes the calculation and really offers the opportunity and credibility of a stable outcome, the Israelis, unfortunately, are going to debate a range of military options, which may not actually succeed, but I think they will be tempted to pursue.
OK, let's bring in my panellists, Michael Crick, a journalist, and Kelly Hyman, a political strategist. Kelly, to you, first of all, in terms of the American interest in this and in terms of what the reaction has been there in the US, what are you expecting, perhaps in terms of formal pronouncements on this?
Well, there needs to be peace in the Middle East, and the U.S. is working on diplomatic avenues to make this happen. It's important that there is some type of ceasefire, that the hostages get back to their families safely, and there's some type of resolution for all of us, because we don't want this to escalate any further and have potentially additional damages and harm.
What do you think, Michael, in terms of the risk of all-out war here, Michael Crick?
Well, it was reassuring to hear from David Hale, the former US ambassador, that he thinks it's only an example of the tit-for-tat that's been going on for years now, and that he doesn't think that Hezbollah will necessarily respond in a big way. But it is a huge risk here. And of course, behind this risk is the fact that Hezbollah is backed by Iran. Iran is in the progress of getting the bomb. We don't know how far away we are from that. And of course, behind Iran is Russia, and linked with Russia is China. So if, it's conceivable that a whole series of events could occur, which would be a terrible, disastrous outcome, have an effect all over the world, quite apart from the fact that an all-out war in the Middle East alone would have in terms of the world economy. And I mean, okay, we're not as dependent on Middle East oil as we used to be, but it's still an important shipping lane. There is so much that's still dependent on the Middle East. So the ramifications are huge.
And David, you're still with us. Obviously, the US has talked about its concerns in terms of US service personnel abroad and potential attacks on them. What exactly, you as a diplomat, what exactly do you think President Biden needs to do now exactly to stop this escalating?
Well, I think it's frankly evident that the United States is increasingly viewed as irrelevant to all of this. We've not been able, this administration has not been able to influence the behavior of most anyone in the Middle East during this campaign. I want to underscore, I don't believe that we're at any way out of a danger zone, but I think that the decision about whether or not there's going to be an all-out escalation rests with Israel, not really with Iran or Hezbollah. I think Iran and Hezbollah would be very happy to avoid that so they can go back to where they were before October 7, more or less with the upper hand. The Israelis in the post-October 7 mindset are not going to accept that. And the United States, if the Biden administration in its last weeks in office can offer a viable diplomatic alternative that actually convinces Israeli decision makers that the equation can change and that they can actually rest confident that there won't be escalation by the other side on their northern border, that would be an opportunity. But so far, the offers that have been made diplomatically are really just a bunch of mini moves about a few UNIFIL fighters here and a few soldiers there. None of that's going to change the equation. The equation changes when the Iranians feel enough pain that they no longer want to take these kinds of risks, and we're not there yet.
Kelly, why do you think that, as David said there, the US has not been able to exert more influence on Israel in this? When you think of how much the US gives Israel in terms of weapons.
Well, with all due respect, I disagree with David on some of its points. The U.S. has been working with efforts. Harris has been working on this effort, as well as President Biden, to have a peaceful resolution. He has worked on getting the hostages back and making sure that they're safe, and continue to do that and continue to make sure that there is peace in the Middle East. And hopefully that will happen.
David?
Well, hope and effort is important, but isn't sufficient to bring about results.
OK. Well, thank you to you, David. We'll say goodbye to you now. Stay with us, my panellists, though, former US Ambassador to Lebanon, David Hale. Thank you very much to you. And we'll have plenty more from my panellists. But for now, we're going to take a short break. Around the world and across the UK, this is
Hello, I'm Katya Adler. Over the years, I've travelled around the world covering some of the biggest news stories of our time. Now, I'm the host of The Global Story, a podcast bringing you fresh perspectives on one big news story each day of the week. Every episode, I sit with a smart and savvy BBC colleague talking about what's happening, why, and what it all means. That's The Global Story. Listen wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Let's turn our attention to US politics now. Mark Robinson, the Republican candidate for governor in North Carolina, will remain on the ballot in November despite growing concern among Republican officials after CNN reported he'd made dozens of disturbing comments on an adult content forum. The broadcaster says Robinson called himself a black Nazi and expressed support for reinstating slavery, along with other lewd comments in posts dating back to 2008. CNN says it was able to verify the post using biographical data correlating to current social media accounts used by Mr. Robinson. This was his response to yesterday.
Those are not the words of Mark Robinson. You know my words, you know my character, and you know that I have been completely transparent in this race and before.
Well, Donald Trump has previously praised Mark Robinson, comparing him to Martin Luther King Jr. at this rally in March.
I think you're better than Martin Luther King. I think you are Martin Luther King ×2.
Well, it comes as the latest polling shows a tightening contest in North Carolina, a state which hasn't been won by a Democrat in a presidential race since Barack Obama in 2008. Let's speak now to Carl Ingram, who is politics reporter at the Raleigh News and Observer in North Carolina. Don't go into too much detail, but just give us a little bit more of an idea of what CNN was saying about all of this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. As we know here in North Carolina, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson has a history of somewhat outrageous and offensive comments, but this was really the biggest that we've ever seen. This is the most attention that he has ever gotten. As you mentioned, in those online forums, he was referring to himself as a black Nazi. He expressed support for slavery. He made a variety of sexually graphic comments, the likes of which we'd never seen from a candidate before.
And how have people been reacting?
There was, when this story first came out from CNN, we essentially heard radio silence from most Republicans. While Democrats were seizing on this story, it seemed that Republicans were working behind the scenes to figure out what their response was going to be to this. There was at least one Republican candidate for a state office that publicly called for Robinson to resign his candidacy. But for the most part, our leadership stayed quiet until about 5 or 6 hours after the story came out, at which point they doubled down and said that they were continuing to support Mark Robinson and that he would be better for North Carolinians than his opponent.
And how are the polls looking there then now?
So even before CNN's report came out, Mark Robinson had been lagging in the polls behind his Democratic opponent, Josh Stein, for the majority of this race. And now, once we see updated polls come out after this, most are expecting him to fall even significantly more behind Stein. And what Democrats are hoping is that this is actually going to lead to a boost for them up and down the ballot and could help Vice President Kamala Harris take the state.
Well, just explain how important North Carolina is as well.
Yes, so North Carolina is one of our battleground states. It's worth 16 electoral votes. Of course, you need 270 to win the presidency. And Democrats really want to win North Carolina. As you mentioned, they haven't done so since 2008. And if Kamala Harris is able to pull this off, she can actually sustain losses in some other major battlegrounds, such as Pennsylvania, possibly.
OK, let's bring in my panel on this. Kelly Hyman, legal and political strategist, and Michael Crick, journalist and broadcaster. Start with you, Kelly. In terms of perhaps if Trump is losing some support generally, what do you put this down to?
Voter turnout is going to be key. That's really important to this election and every election, that people get out there and access their right to go to the polls and vote for whoever that they want to. And North Carolina is a key state. Now, a few months ago, it wasn't even a possibility potentially for Harris to win that state. However, things have changed, and one especially being Mark Robinson. We also have to remember some of his comments that he made in the past that were posted on Facebook in regards to, he allegedly said that the Holocaust was a hoax, and all these different kind of statements against women about going back in time where women weren't able to vote. And so that is definitely going to be on key to this election, and him running in North Carolina could potentially affect the upper ballot being Trump and the lower ballot as well. And it's also important to remember that Trump is coming to North Carolina tomorrow, and Mark Robinson is not going to be at his rally.
And Michael, Kamala Harris has just been speaking in the last half hour at a rally in Georgia, and she's been saying that she's been trying to get a second debate with Trump. She's really keen. He said he's not going to have one because he won the last one. These TV debates in the US have been pretty exciting, I suppose, in terms of the influence that they've been having. What did you make in terms of Donald Trump's performance in the last one and how it may have affected his standing in the polls?
Well, I think he did really badly, and Kamala Harris clearly won that debate. Well, at least in my opinion. But I think there's, everybody's saying she should have a second debate, and she's going for a second debate. On the other hand, I think that Trump will prepare a lot better next time. I suspect that Trump.
You think there'll be a next time? Do you? You think he'll agree to it?
Sorry? Well, if he was to agree to it, it doesn't look like he's going to agree to it anyway. But if there was to be a second debate, I think it would be a bit more even than it was last time round, simply because I think Trump clearly seems to have ignored the advice that his advisors must have been giving him. And maybe he'll be, a little bit more careful next time to think about how Kamala Harris might attack him, how he might attack her, how he must avoid being diverted by things about like the cats and dogs story and the number of people at his rally and all of those things. He needs to put a lot more thought into it. In the unlikely event there is a debate on the story of Mr. Robinson, I mean, one would think rationally this is going to lose a few votes for the Republicans and for Trump in North Carolina. But the trouble with modern politics, both in America and in this country and much of the rest of the Western world, is that things no longer happen in a rational way. And you sort of think, well, that's bound to affect the vote. And it doesn't always. Voters can be quite perverse. And so I think if it does make a difference, it may be a rather smaller than many people might assume.
I hear the frustration of a journalist not being able to predict things there, Michael. Yes. Carl, just quickly, I mean, I find it fascinating how important the voting public is in these battleground states. I mean, do people around you feel that? Do they feel the sort of the weight of responsibility on their shoulders because their vote, whether you like it or not, it does count so much more, doesn't it, than in some other states?
Absolutely. I think North Carolinians are very engaged politically. And when we go and cover these rallies, we've been covering Kamala Harris's rallies, Donald Trump's, the voters there understand the importance of this election and what their role in it is. As you mentioned, the way that our system is set up, their votes matter quite a lot to the outcome of this election, and they're very politically engaged and ready to get out there and cast their votes.
OK, well, thank you to you, Kyle. Thank you. Very good to talk to you. Yes, go on, Michael.
I'd say it's a big contrast with the old days where some candidates would go to nearly every state in the campaign. I mean, Nixon in '68, I think, promised to go to all 50. I can't remember if he did. And when I was there 35 years ago, the candidates would be going 4 or 5 places a day, and lots more states were in play. And of course, California was also very much in play in those days. And that was a big difference. Yeah, very frustrating for people who feel their vote doesn't matter. Carl, thank you to you for joining us. I just want to turn our attention now to another item that's been coming out of the US today, to mention, and that is that the acting director of the US Secret Service has been saying this in an update on the investigation into the assassination attempt against Donald Trump in July. Have a listen.
This was a failure on the part of the United States Secret Service. It's important that we hold ourselves accountable for the failures of July 13th, and that we use the lessons learned to make sure that we do not have another failure like this again. The findings of the Mission Assurance Review have prompted the Secret Service to move into the accountability phase of this process. The Office of Professional Responsibility and the Office of Integrity are reviewing the findings. And as a result of these failures, what has become clear to me is we need a shift in paradigm in how we conduct our protective operations.
Some really damning admission of failure there from the Secret Service. Kelly Hyman, you're a political strategist, a Democrat. Who do you blame for the situation regarding the Secret Service?
Well, ultimately, it's the Secret Service responsibility in order to protect not only the president, but the vice president, but also a candidate for it. And they have that role. And I find it refreshing the fact that they are being accountable for their actions. And they are saying that ultimately that we messed up and it is our job to do it. And hopefully that this will never happen again.
What do you make of this interim review that they've been talking about today, Michael? I mean, some of the information that's come out of it is quite surprising, really. We had this situation, I was talking to John Sudworth about it earlier, where the local police had one radio wave that they were talking to each other on, and then the Secret Service had another. They didn't know what was going on. In fact, they were totally behind the local forces, describing what was happening, this concern about this one person. And it was something so simple as that they weren't coordinating on.
I know, it's a complete shambles. And one would have thought, after the embarrassment, humiliation of the previous assassination attempt, a couple of months ago, that they would have sharpened up their act by now. But that's not to be. But, let's face it, police forces are a shambles in many places. And there is a complacency, I think, that builds into organisations like that. And, of course, they never know when something might happen. But in this case, Trump, they must have, they've surely realised that Trump is a huge target right now. And he has to be looked after.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because politicians want to go out and about and meet people and be seen to be meeting people and to be seen to be adored by people. They've got to have people standing behind them and around them. And it's such a difficult balancing act between these sort of staged events where they just have their supporters, isn't it? It's such a hard balancing act for the politicians at campaign time.
Although in this case, of course, he wasn't at a public event. He was just playing golf. And I suppose the point there is that politicians should also be allowed their private time. But for most politicians, their private time is probably at home rather than perhaps on an open golf course like that, although all American presidents seem to play golf. So there is a difference between that and the event at the rally in Pennsylvania from last July, I think it was.
Yeah.
And the trouble is senior politicians also need the freedom to change their minds or to say, I do feel like going out and playing golf today.
Hold that thought. Well, we've got to leave it there. We've got to take a very short break. Very shortly, we'll be back with you.
Hello. High pressure is dominating the weather picture across Central Europe, bringing lots of dry and sunny weather here. But despite that, of course, there continues to be flooding concerns with those very high river levels, for example, in the Danube. Further west, we've got showers and thunderstorms developing this weekend. They'll be moving across parts of Spain and Portugal, heading across France and also affecting parts of England and Wales. With those downpours, some areas could see 50 millimetres of rain in quite a short space of time, so some localised surface water flooding is possible. There'll also be thunderstorms in Greece and parts of Turkey with some gusty winds around the Aegean for a time. So pretty unsettled, quite a high chance of storms then across western areas of Europe. Central Europe, though, plenty of sunshine. 24 degrees Celsius, your top temperature in Frankfurt. Should be mostly fine for southern regions of Norway and Sweden as well. We've got more of those storms to come on Sunday, again affecting parts of France, England and Wales with some really hefty downpours. It's still dry at this stage in Central Europe. Showers and thunderstorms becoming much less widespread in Greece, but probably some heavier showers working into Corsica and Sardinia. The outlook over the next few days, well, showers and thunderstorms are set to move eastwards to affect the mainland of Italy, so we'll see some of those into Rome during the early stages of the new week. Athens, clearing any showers, should be dry from Sunday onwards. Bye for now.
I see myself in the girls that we're fighting for. I see my daughters in those girls.
Frankly, all I ever wanted was to be on stage. I never thought I'd be on telly or indeed in a film or be in the public eye in that way.
Climate change is real and we must act now.
Argument is less powerful than emotion, and negative emotion is more powerful than positive emotion.
The danger is you're listening to advice you can only be your own critic. You can't say, what do you think? That's a disaster.
When big names talk, they talk to us.
Hello and welcome to Focus on Africa, the place where real-time, in-depth and relatable stories matter. With me, Wahiga Mwaura, coming to you from Nairobi, where we unfold your discussions.
I always want to keep it original by being me.
News.
Macron announced that the French forces will leave by the end of the year.
And conversations.
It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life.
That bring you to the heart of the continent. Focus on Africa from BBC News.
Tony Blair was Prime Minister for over a decade, coming to power on a wave of optimism, but leaving mired in controversy over the Iraq War. With Labour back in power, it's a good time to hear from the party's most successful leader. Join me for Amol Rajan interviews Sir Tony Blair here on BBC News.
2 years ago, Sri Lanka's economic crisis sparked mass protests and toppled the government. In these first elections since then, people are looking for change and hope the new president will be able to rebuild the economy and bring much needed political stability to the country. Join me, Samir Hussain, on BBC News.
Next on Hard Talk, Iman Mazari Hazir, the Pakistani lawyer fighting for justice for the disappeared and speaking out on the country's powerful army. Amid political and economic turmoil, is the rule of law in Pakistan in crisis?
Hello, I'm Lucy Gray. You're watching The Context on BBC News. Coming up, the UK Prime Minister will no longer accept donations for clothes after a row over gifts. Party conference season is well underway here in the UK. Today, Reform leader Nigel Farage opened his party's conference in Birmingham. He told supporters that Britain is broken and said this was the weekend that his party would come of age.
We do not need to change the mind of a single person living in this country, because the silent majority is already with us on the key issues that we care about. We can win the next general election just with the numbers of people that agree with our principles, that agree that family, that agree that community, that agree that country should be the things that absolutely that everybody in British public life campaigns for, because they are the most important things to all of us that live here.
And the Labour Party's annual conference will also kick off this weekend, but it comes in a week in which the Prime Minister has faced criticism over the salary of his closest advisor, as well as donations that he and his wife have accepted in clothing. Earlier, a Downing Street source said neither the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister nor Chancellor will accept further donations for clothes. The row over expensive clothing and corporate hospitality comes against the backdrop of a tumbling confidence in how consumers feel about the economy and their own finances as the country prepares for the autumn budget, which the Prime Minister has already warned will be painful. New figures today also showed that government borrowing rose unexpectedly last month to £13.7 billion. Our economics editor Faisal Islam has been looking at what it means.
This much-watched gauge of consumer sentiment has been running for 50 years. It was gradually improving over the past several months as real incomes after inflation had gone up, as you'd expect. And really, this month, after an interest rate cut last month, you'd have expected that to have improved. It has gone down sharply across the board. People's perceptions of the economy, people's perceptions of their personal finance, their willingness to make major purchases. And certainly, some economists, some retailers, some business groups are drawing a connection between the tone we're getting from the government ahead of the budget and what we're seeing. And so some calls maybe for some more hopeful optimism from the government, particularly ahead of their party conference. They say that they have to make these tough choices because of the borrowing situation. That got worse, according to other figures released this morning. A tricky balancing act for the Chancellor.
Michael Crick, journalist, and Kelly Hyman, a political strategist, are still with me. I mean, Michael, the thing is that Labour have been talking down the economy since they took over, and the problem is that if you talk it down, it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, it's been very badly thought through. I mean, Labour were telling us that the one big advantage of having a Labour government, many of the policies are not really that different in terms of the economy, but the one thing that Labour would bring, they told us, would be stability. And what's happened is that they've been telling everybody everything's going to be very tight, and pensioners aren't going to get their winter fuel allowance, some of them, and the cap on child benefit is going to be restricted at 2 children. And everything's going to be tight for a long time, and taxes may have to go up in some way or another. And that has done the opposite of what they wanted. We haven't got the stability. On the contrary, there's gloom and doom. And Keir Starmer has a huge, and the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, have a huge job next week when the Labour conference meets in Liverpool to try and turn that around and cheer everybody up. Otherwise, they're not going to get the growth that everything really depends on.
Yeah, Kelly, you're a political strategist. How long can the party that takes over power keep blaming the previous one and saying, they've got a lot to fix before people start, turning off them? What do you think? Do you have a sort of figure in mind in terms of months and years?
Well, the economy is key. So that's whether you're in the UK or in the US. And so depending on what they're saying in regards to how long that it's going to take them to fix something like potentially 6 months or potentially even longer for a year. But I think it's important to see that what policies and places are going to be implemented in order to fix this, and how is the best way to do it, and how long is it going to take? Is it going to take 6 months? Is it going to take a year? Or are you looking for something a little bit longer in regards to time period? So I would expect 6 months to potentially a year at least.
Yeah, because in the US, we've got President Biden basically talking up the economy today, haven't we? He said that the fact that the Federal Reserve has done this interest rate cut today is a signal that they've entered a new phase in the economy and recovery. Very notably, though, I suppose, just about to go into an election, whereas Sir Keir Starmer has just taken over.
Yes, that's definitely going to play a role is the economy. The economy is definitely one of the things that are driving people to the polls. Not only that, but for women, reproductive freedom as well, and other issues that are affecting the American people. But definitely the economy, and definitely people are going to look at what the economy was like under Trump, of what he did and how he added trillions to our deficit, and how there was a loss of jobs, and what Biden has done, and how he's increased jobs, and what he's done for the American people. That's definitely going to play a key role in the November election.
Michael, the criticism about Kamala Harris from the Republicans is repeatedly that she hasn't given enough detail about what she's going to do to help people with the cost of living. What do you think in terms of where people are going to vote? I mean, that is the key thing, isn't it? The cost of living in the US. That's their focus, isn't it, when they go to the ballot?
It is, and it nearly always is the focus when people go to the polls in whatever country. I sort of partly think maybe Kamala Harris's advisors have taken a look at how Keir Starmer got elected in Britain with a whopping great majority of seats in the House of Commons, although a very low vote actually in terms of numbers. And of course, he and his party gave very little away about what they were going to do in the run-up to the election day, and it didn't actually seem to do Labour that much harm. The problem is, I think, that contributing to this pessimism is that by now people would have expected this government to come out with more detail about how they're going to resolve all the many problems that this country faces.
I suppose they had a much greater lead in the polls, though, didn't they? So perhaps they were trying not to risk that and saying not very much because they didn't want to risk that great lead. And Kamala Harris at the moment does not have that. It is very, very tight, isn't it, the race at the moment, Kelly?
It is a different picture, yeah. And if you're 2-0 up against Real Madrid, you tend to play safe. Whereas if you're drawing, you've got to do something adventurous.
Yeah. Let's just mention, we mentioned Nigel Farage. I won't expect you, Kelly, to know too much about him necessarily, although you have had him over there in the US, haven't you? Actually, I can talk to you about how this party conference has been described as a Trump-style rally with, I think there have been people wearing baseball caps saying, let's make Britain great again. Do you accept perhaps that the Trump rally is something to be exported? It does do sort of some convincing?
America is always great, and we don't need Trump to make it great again. And I would disagree in regards to the policy. When we look at the debate between Harris and Trump, he was specifically asked about health care and what his policy was. And he was in the office for 4 years, and he didn't do anything to help the American people in regards to the health care. And he was asked specifically in the debate, what is your plan to help the American people in regards to health care? And basically didn't answer the question, didn't have any type of policy, was talking about cats and dogs being eaten, and talking about how large his crowd sizes was, where Harris was talking about policies and how she grew up in middle class and what she wants to do for the American people and what she sees for the future and fighting for the freedom for women.
Back to Nigel Farage, Michael. They've been getting very excited at their party conference, which people do, don't they? They get a bit carried away. It's all very exciting, getting everyone together and talking about how well they're going to do and what they need to do. He first of all started saying they need to start being more like the Liberal Democrats, without the stunts like water slides and the like, in terms of targeting specific seats. But he also said that, there's a chance that we could win the next election. And we know we haven't lost our marbles, there really is. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's most unlikely they'll win the next election. And he's right in terms of adopting Lib Dem policy. One of the things Lib Dems started is they focus on a local area, concentrate on getting local councillors elected, then extend it into the constituencies around that area and take it from there. And Farage's various parties have never been very good at that. So he's right in that respect. But this idea that, they've got 5 seats now. I think that might well go up. If there are by-elections in this parliament, although by-elections won't be common because it's quite a youthful parliament, so you're less likely to get MPs dying. But the Reform Party are now a serious threat to both the Conservatives and to Labour. And they're actually much more of a threat to Labour than they are to the Conservatives. In those seats in the north and the white working class seats of the north and the Midlands, where, of course, Brexit did extremely well in the referendum. So he's got everything to play for. And just to think, he almost didn't stand in this election saying that he had too much time. He had to go off to America and help Donald Trump. Well, good thing from his point of view, he changed his mind.
No time for the US now, yeah. I have to ask you both, are you frequent flyers? Do you like aeroplane food? I'm not. I don't fly enough to be able to no, aeroplane food has got really bad over recent years. It wasn't bad 40 or 50 years ago. Well, it's got even worse, because you're not going to like this next item, I have to tell you, because on a flight, Scandinavian Airlines flight from Oslo to Malaga on Wednesday, somebody opened up their lunch and a mouse jumped out of their in-flight meal, causing the plane to divert and make an emergency landing in Copenhagen. Jarle Borrestad was on board, and we wanted him to come on the programme, but he's now on holiday and he had more important things to do, like go to the bar. So he sent us this video telling us what happened.
Well, yes, it's true what they say. I was experiencing this mouse incident on SAS from Oslo to Malaga a couple of days ago, when the lady next to me opened her box of delicious food, seemingly, and out jumped a small mouse. Not mice, it was a small mouse, yes. To be honest, it was very tranquilo situation. People was not stressed at all. It was kind of, should we eat this food or should we just not? But I'm kind of creeped up to us. I'm like, maybe I should tuck my socks over my jeans so it doesn't crawl up my legs and finds its way to secret places you don't want mouse to go. That was kind of my worry, so I did the socks up my jeans and just continue enjoying the flight. That had to take a turn and go back to Copenhagen. So we changed the planes, waited just 2 hours more for the delay to Malaga. But now we're here, enjoying the golf, enjoying the cerveza, enjoying the beach, and the mouse probably doesn't enjoy that much.
He's just so chilled out about it, isn't he? I don't think, Kelly, that I would have been quite so chilled if a mouse had jumped over me from next door. What do you make of this?
As someone who's a frequent flyer, I'm going to be very wary when I have my food on the plane next time. And hopefully that mouse is not a frequent flyer like myself, and that was their first and last flight.
Yeah, this caused an emergency landing, Michael, and I can tell you why. Apparently, it's because of the worry that the mice might chew through some wiring, because they're really tough. They have very tough teeth, and they can chew through anything. So that's why they had to actually land the plane. They had to this little stop in Copenhagen. They tried to find the mouse, couldn't. So they got another plane and found another plane and sent people on their way to Malaga, because it was actually an emergency situation.
The answer is to have a cat on each plane.
Yeah, and keep it on board until they found it. Yeah, very good. Well, that's my choice of topic, and after this short break, we will find out your choice of topics, guys, around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
Between the 16th century BC and 12th century AD, the longest-lasting Andean civilization developed near Lake Titicaca, which is located in the Andes Mountains on the border of Bolivia and Peru. However, it disappeared suddenly and mysteriously.
Los restos arqueológicos de la cultura tiwanaku están expandidos en 4 países actuales. La más sostenida es una crisis ambiental que ha generado una sequía prolongada. Se han sacrificado alrededor de 19 jóvenes que consideramos que fueron parte de una ofrenda para enviar el mensaje y llamar las lluvias a los dioses tutelares que tenían los Tiwanaku.
Original global stories from the BBC.
Now it is time for the panel. And as I said, this is where our panellists get to decide the topic that we cover. So, Michael, what do you want to talk about?
Well, it's a story that's appeared on the Telegraph website this afternoon about how the Chinese ambassador to Britain had gone to Cambridge University and met a group of Chinese students at the university and told them that they should serve the motherland and take patriotism as the foundation of their studies. Now, you might think, well, that's the sort of thing that any old ambassador would say to a group of students from his country. But I think that it's a rather ominous thing that he said there, and it will only reinforce the fears of many of us who think that the increasing numbers of Chinese students in British universities in recent years comes with lots of dangers. And 2 in particular, I would say. First, the danger that in being patriotic and thinking about serving the motherland, there may be theft of intellectual property, which is certainly a widespread fear in amongst many of our universities. And second, the whole question of whether students, being many of them loyal members of the Communist Party, loyal citizens, will feel that they should report back to Beijing on dissident students who speak out against or speak out even in private meetings about Hong Kong, about free speech or whatever. And of course, that has been a big concern amongst in universities in the West which have many Chinese students. So I think, it reminds us that there is a big downside potentially to allowing so many Chinese students to come to our universities. We've become hugely dependent on their income, but we may be losing out in other ways.
Was there any reaction from the university to it?
Not that I'm aware of. I think they've refused to comment, haven't they?
Well,
just not said anything. But
right. And what about the students themselves?
No, not that I'm aware of. I mean, the story probably hasn't had a huge amount of coverage yet. I hope it is. I hope it is picked up. But the universities are all a bit embarrassed by this, and they tend to turn a blind eye to many of these issues. I mean, I used to sit on a governing body, and I said, well, can't we cap the number of students from China at this university? And they said, well, that wouldn't be allowed because of equalities law, that you can't put a limit on people coming from any nationality. So I said, well, how many Uyghur students then do the Chinese send to this university? How many Tibetans? And how many Falun Gong do they send? And of course, figures weren't kept for that, even though figures for all sorts of other minorities, students, universities regularly keep. I think universities have become too dependent on the Chinese income, the Chinese students. There are a lot of good sides to that. The interaction and so on, intellectual interaction is great. But I think we need to worry a little bit more about the downside of all this.
I suppose that their argument would be about, in terms of the universities, a lot of funding comes in from it, don't they?
Exactly. And of course, at a time when the university undergraduate fees have been going down, or at least they haven't gone up since 2016 and barely gone up since 2012, I think it is, the universities have become more and more dependent on this foreign income, and the number of Chinese students has been going up until recently. And, you know, it's another reason why the new government needs to get a grip on the terrible funding problems that our universities have, and the danger that some of our universities are about to go bankrupt.
OK, I'm so sorry, Kelly, because Michael has taken all of your time for your story. I do apologise, we're out of time. But really,
sorry.
No worries at all. Great to have you both with me. Thank you so much. My panellists tonight, Michael Crick, journalist and broadcaster, and Kelly Hyman, political and legal strategist. Thanks very much to you. Thanks very much for everybody for watching. I'm Lucy Gray. You can get me on social media at Lucy E. Gray. Bye for now. Do stay with us here on BBC News.